October the 7th is about remembering and commemorating. Like here at the Nova Festival site this morning. Or here in Jerusalem outside Benjamin Netanyahu's house, where the names of every hostage still in Gaza, both living and dead, were read out. The response, Hosea, returning. But as talks to end the war that started that day continue in Egypt, October the 7th is also a time to reflect on what's ahead, on the future of two babies whose lives were defined by that date, Hamza Imad Rabbi in Gaza and Lotan Haimi in Israel. Lotan was born 6 months after his father was taken hostage by Hamas. On October the 7th, Tal Haimi rushed out to defend his kibbutz. His body is still in Gaza.
Today I feel a little bit tense, actually.
His widow Ella spoke to us today. Locating deceased hostages like her husband, part of the so-called technical discussions now taking place in Egypt. If there's progress and the deal happens, do you have any sense of the logistics of what happens next?
I'm waiting for a funeral. I'm wishing for a funeral. I'm wishing for a place to cry on. To hope that the Hamas can grab him from the ground, that they can find him.
One of the many reasons Ella wants her husband's body back, closure. But not just for her.
Not all of my kids are sure that he's dead. One of them, he has questions. He is a little bit feel uncertainty about it, because he said, how can you say that someone is dead if you don't have a body? I don't believe you. So he don't believe me also. He don't believe anyone, because we told him that his father is dead, but he think he's alive. And he telling me, you will see he will come back on his foot.
Ella is determined that Lotan, who's now 1.5, will get to know his father, just not in person.
I show him a photo and I tell him, this is Abba Tal. This is Father Tal. Yeah, and he said, he see a photo and he said, Abba Tal. And this is so cute, but this is also so sad.
The release of hostages is Donald Trump's priority. He wrote an open letter to the families and signed off with prayers that this conflict will be over in the coming days, or else. The release of Israeli hostages isn't the only sticking point when it comes to these negotiations in Egypt. Also, they're discussing who should be on the list of Palestinian prisoners and detainees released in exchange. And disarmament, also a crucial sticking point. Hamas want to retain some of their small arms. The Israelis want them to decommission everything. The fact that the US envoys Witkoff and Kushner are due at the talks in Sharm el-Sheikh soon suggests there's been some progress on these types of issues. Hamza Imad Rabbi was born a month ago. His mother Diana was critically wounded in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. His father was killed. Hamza was delivered by emergency caesarean section and Diana died in childbirth. We first filmed him on the day his great-aunt, Maha Rubai, collected him from hospital. Now they're both living in a partially destroyed building in Gaza, but Hamza's health is improving.
God saved his mother for long enough so she could give birth to this child. Everything is improving. It feels as if he's becoming normal, even in his mind. Before, he couldn't even move his head from side to side. He never opened his eyes at all.
Now he is. But will the world he sees be changed by the talks in Egypt? In Israel, Lotan Haimi is learning to talk. How will they both tell the stories of their beginnings?
Well, earlier I caught up briefly with Israel's main opposition leader, Yair Lapid, as he was leaving here in Hostages Square. How hopeful are you that this is a moment, and what is it going to take to secure agreement?
Well, I don't want to use the words goodwill when talking to a terror organization, but I think right now we have more reasons to be hopeful than we had in the last 2 years, even due to the simple fact that the President of the United States has threw his weight into this arena and decided to make this happen. And I see no way for the Israeli Prime Minister to say no to the President when he's so obligated to the issue. I wish our government was as obligated to the hostages' return as the Americans are right now, but it doesn't matter as long as it happens.
And do you think this is a real process?
Yes.
Towards peace and a two-state solution?
I think it's a real process towards a deal that will bring back the hostages and end the war, and then we'll see. Talking about the far future is maybe an outreach right now. Right now, what we need to do is have a hostage deal, bring our children back home, and stop the war that is going nowhere.
And you trust the Prime Minister not to backslide?
I am working in order to make sure the Prime Minister understands and the American administration understands that he has got every needed political security net to make this happen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I've also been speaking to Udi Goren, whose cousin Tal Haimi's remains are still being held by Hamas. How are you today?
Anxious, very anxious. I think we're at a point, after this hellish roller coaster in 2 years, we've been up and down. We've been very, very close. We've been told, just in the past 6 months, we've been told tomorrow, in 2 days, next week, and nothing happened. And now it feels different, but, we've been there before.
Why does it feel different?
It feels different because, first of all, the plan on the table, the deal on the table, was pushed by President Trump, and he is very, very adamant in keeping his word of ending wars, cutting deals, and bringing peace. This is all he's been talking about, and finally, it seems like he's putting all of his weight down to make this happen.
A lot of people we've been speaking to say this is just about a ceasefire and getting the hostages back. There's no two-state solution really on the table. The idea of a long, proper plan is for the birds.
I think that if you speak about the solution as being the two-state solution, I think you're absolutely right. It's just words. It's dust in the wind. However, what is in the plan is an alternative to Hamas, which is the very essential of creating a different future for this region, someone that we can actually talk to. It speaks about de-radicalization. It speaks about a new government for Gaza that is accepting of Israel. And speaking about the two-state plan, well, this is great. We can speak about this in 10 or 15 years. What needs to happen now, first and foremost, is that we need to end the violence. We need to have a government over the Palestinian Authority and over Gaza that acknowledges the Jewish state. We need a government in Israel that acknowledges that the Palestinians deserve to live freely and safely. And from that point on, we need to begin the reconstruction of Gaza, thinking for the future, rebuilding above ground, not underground, and having a coalition that supports this idea.
I think the last time we spoke, you were unable really to have a sense of what bringing Tal home would really feel like or mean for your family. As this comes closer into view, have you been able to come to terms with that?
Yeah, I think, over this past year, there were several murdered hostages that were brought back. And obviously now, we all, the hostage families, we all know each other. We see what it's like. And we see what a huge difference this makes. Because, when you go through a grieving process of losing someone, there's all these steps that you take. At first, it's denial, then there's anger. And at the end of it, you come to terms. And we're stuck. We're stuck on the first stage, which, normally people would tell you, if you're stuck on the first stage of grief, you need to go see a therapist. But the circumstances are such that we just can't move forward. And if we, the adults, can't handle this, what about Tal's kids? That, all they know is that dad had left home on October 7th and never came back. And people tell them he's dead, but they haven't seen him. There's no proof. So I think especially seeing the families of the hostages that were brought back for burial and how they were finally able to lay them to rest and have some rest themselves and come to terms with losing their loved ones. And now from this point, they can go on living their lives.
How have you felt about the protests that you've seen around the world that are pro-Palestinian?
I think that the main thing that these people out in the street are protesting is that they lack the understanding of what sides there are of this conflict. Because this is not the conflict of Israelis against Palestinians. This is a conflict of people who just want to live and are pro-peace or pro-resolution against people who are pro-war religious fundamentalists on both sides. And if you're rooting for Hamas, if you're rooting for the continual control of Hamas over Gaza, you're on the wrong side.
I think most of those people on the protest would say they're not supporting that, but they're supporting Palestinian self-determination in some form, and independence, and the freedom to live. And that's something you
in
want
that case, if you support Palestinian independence, if you support the right of every Palestinian to live, but you don't support my right to live, then you completely miss the point. If you support human rights, you need to support my right as well. I've been a peace activist for the past 15 years. My cousin Tal, who was murdered in a terrorist attack when they were coming to murder his family, he believed in coexistence. He wanted the conflict to end. And if you don't support my right to live here peacefully, you completely miss the point. Because if you really want to see the conflict end, you and I are allies. And you need to support me as well. Because the conflict is between those who want to see a continual war, eternal war, based on religious promise to whatever God, and those who just want to live here peacefully and calmly. And you need to pick a side. And if you're rooting for Palestinian safety and security, great, we're on the same side. Root for my right to live that way too.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you again.
Now, student protests are nothing new, but pro-Palestinian demonstrations scheduled for today across the UK, on this the anniversary of the October 7th attacks, and less than a week since the terrorists killed 2 men at a Manchester synagogue, have drawn criticism from the Prime Minister. Sir Keir Starmer said that it was un-British to have so little respect for others. Some events were called off, but as our communities editor Darshna Soni reports, others who did attend demonstrations dismissed the Prime Minister's reservations.
They'd been asked not to protest today, the Prime Minister urging students to think carefully about their actions and urging that in London had the opposite effect.
I feel like we should make more noise today. This is free speech, and I can do whatever I want, and I can protest whatever I want, and I don't think Keir Starmer has a say in what I say or what I do or where I go.
But this has become about so much more than free speech, given how politicised and polarised the issue of Gaza has become. Here at Sheffield Uni, they've regularly been protesting against the war. But was today's event un-British and not who we are as a country? As Keir Starmer has argued, given the significance of today's anniversary,
what do we all know about October 7th?
And last week's attack at the Manchester synagogue. So who came out in defiance of the Prime Minister today? A coalition of communists, student societies and the Socialist Worker Party. How do you feel about Keir Starmer suggesting that these protests are somehow un-British?
Protesting and students protesting is not un-British, it is the most British thing. For years in this country, South African apartheid, for example, the Stop the War movement in the early 2000s, students were all over that. Students have been at the forefront of so many things. They've been like a radical moment of change.
Do you accept that some Jewish students might feel intimidated today, though?
I can see why they would be intimidated in some sense, but I mean, it's the matter of fact that we are not against the Jewish faith. You know, this is a movement that has brought in all sections of society.
No, 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 no,
The security guards have been watching the protest. They haven't intervened. The university told us that they haven't given permission for this event to go ahead and that they had asked students to postpone it. Some Jewish students said they tried to avoid the protests today. And what was it in particular about this date?
So I think it's meant to mark the 2 years since the war, but the 7th of October was when the largest amount of Jews have been killed since the Holocaust, and that's quite a traumatic event for Jewish students on campus.
What did you think about Keir Starmer suggesting that to go ahead today was somehow un-British?
I do agree that it's incredibly insensitive, and maybe to some level British values are to, we have a melting pot culture, and for Jewish individuals this is not something that's comfortable for us.
Universities UK, which represents the sector, said whilst campuses are places where contentious views can be expressed, students should have considered the timing and sensitivity of protests.
Well, 2 years ago, Sharon Lifshitz learned that her mother and father had been abducted by Hamas terrorists. Her father was later killed. But her mother was freed as part of a swap for Palestinian prisoners. Both had been lifelong peace activists. And on her release, Sharon's mother, Yoheved, chose to say shalom, peace, to her captors.
You go with this one. Shalom.
Sharon has described this as a moment of impossible grace, and she joins me now. Thanks very much for joining us. Perhaps we'll talk about the protests in a minute, but anniversaries can be really difficult things, can't they? Because they take you back to the event, and then there is all the time in between, and it has been a terrible 2 years on many fronts. I just wonder what you feel today.
A certain degree of hope that things are going to resolve just now very quickly. I think El Thani, the Prime Minister of Qatar, is coming to Egypt tomorrow. All these are good signs, and to be honest, if the hostages can come back, the war can finish, at that point I can really feel the anniversary, because it's really hard to really think about what happened when things are still happening in such a strong way.
It is ongoing.
It is, indeed.
I mean, that moment of impossible grace, as you described it, when your mother, released from captivity, essentially made a sign of peace towards her captors. At that point, you had hoped your father was still alive, and you subsequently learnt that he had died. Could you still make that shalom today?
Absolutely. I think what's missing from, we said about the demonstration today, it's very rare that you hear any of them talking about peace, about reconciliation, about understanding each other's pain. What we need is to have more understanding of each other's pain.
I mean, that is very interesting. We have spoken before, and in many ways what you have always been able to do is sort of hold what for many people are competing, opposing thoughts in your mind, that you were horrified, obviously, about the Hamas attack and the impact on your family and many others. But you have also been horrified about what has happened in Gaza. The fact that many people cannot see both of those things in the round, how dangerous is that? How dangerous has that been?
I think that the world is a complicated place, and people want to split us up as nations only, but we also can be split up as those who believe in the sanctity of life, believe in each other as human beings, can look across the divide and offer our hand in peace, and can see the pain of the other. I don't think it's too much to ask. And I think that if today the demonstration just stood up and say, we can understand the pain of the community of Nir Oz that lost so many people in such a horrific attack, that would have built trust. That would have built us forward to something we can hold on to together.
I mean, obviously, as you heard in the piece, Prime Minister Starmer said it was un-British to go ahead today of all days. Do you agree with him on that?
It's insensitive, I would say that. It's insensitive. And I think they could have done it in a way that have shown sensitivity, have shown care for human beings. we don't choose which nation to be born to. We don't choose where we are born to. We choose what we do with our lives. And to basically say that one side is this and the other one is that is so sad, isn't it? So reductive of what we are as human beings and what we can do and be in our life.
After, I mean, you're the duality of your life, you're hugely impacted, of course, by what happened in Israel. But less than a week ago, we saw a horrific attack on the synagogue in Manchester. 2 people lost their lives, others were injured. What were your thoughts as those events unfolded?
To me, it's always about hate. How much hate what can hate make you do? It's horrific. It's so scary. You know, I was on the way to my community and the whole community was so rattled. It's frightening. In some ways, it's not surprising because hate is being rewarded, is being understood. Too many people excuse it. Too many people explain it away. There is no reason to kill people in the UK.
You know, that binary sort of view of things, when you look at the wider protests, I completely accept what you say about the sensitivities of today. There are many people at those protests, including British Jewish people, who feel it's their only way of expressing their horror at what is happening. Do you feel, as others do, though, that they should have stopped altogether? I mean, we see in Israel, in Hostage Square, people protesting. We saw David Lammy shouted at when he attended Manchester for a vigil after the attack. How do you balance that, the right to protest, with understanding other people's point of view?
I am for the right to protest. I spent my life, I grew up in the protest movement in Israel, in Peace Now, on my father's shoulders. All my life I've been in protest. The question is, how do you make a protest that is pro-life, that acknowledges the humanity of both sides, and that call for solutions, not just for justice, but for something that allow all the people of the region to feel included?
I mean, you said today in a piece that you wrote that, you know, you hope we can all learn from that moment of impossible grace by your mother. Briefly, if you would, what can we learn?
That we are more than who we were born, that we can reach out to our enemies, that Anwar Sadat did it in 1978 and made peace between 2 nations, the Egyptians and the Israelis, and that there are many, many people that wish for peace, and we have to be brave enough. If enough of us vie for peace, move towards peace, it will happen. It's in our hands.
Sharon Lifshitz, thank you so much for coming in. Thank you. Thank you. Now back to Krishnan in Tel Aviv.
Thank you, Jackie. Well, welcome back to Hostage Square, where the main event is now well underway, expressing support for the hostage families and also demanding a deal to get them all back and to have a ceasefire. Well, the impact of the attacks on October 7th has, of course, been profound, beyond the human pain. The diplomatic and military realities of this entire region have been redrawn in ways that could hardly have been imagined back in 2023. Over the last 2 years, Gaza has been turned into a wasteland. The signs of once living cities have vanished. Israeli forces razed entire neighborhoods. Rafah, Khan Yunis, Gaza City. Their names now carry unbearable suffering. 78% of buildings are now destroyed, 98% of farmland damaged, and 90% of schools destroyed or damaged. But it's not just Gaza. The Middle East has changed irreversibly. Events once unthinkable unfolded one after another. In Lebanon, Israel showed how far it could reach. Thousands of pages simultaneously exploded across the country. 12 people were killed, thousands scarred. The so-called axis of resistance was beginning to collapse. But it was the killing of Hassan Nasrallah that marked the fall of Hezbollah, the militant group once a formidable force, now a shadow of its former self. Even Iran, the backbone of the Axis, was not exempt. First, surgical, precise assassinations, and then came Israel's first direct conflict with the Iranian regime, a 12-day war that shocked the region this year. And a weakened Iran could no longer rescue its allies. In Syria too, a mammoth shift. After decades of clinging to power through a brutal war and Iranian and Russian support, the regime of Bashar al-Assad fell. And through it all, Israel has continued to receive unwavering support from the United States. The conflict began under President Biden, but carried on under President Trump, transcending elections, party lines and presidential terms. Now Donald Trump wants results. Momentum is growing around his 20-point Gaza peace deal. As negotiators gather in Egypt, speaking of ceasefires, reconstruction and governance, everyone in the room will know, whatever the outcome, this is a region changed forever. Well, I'm joined now by the Israeli diplomat and writer Alan Pincus and Omar Rahman, a fellow at the Middle East Council of Global Affairs. Alan Pincus, first, if in terms of the reflections of how the world and Israel has changed over the last 2 years, start with domestically, how this nation, which is obviously still in shock, has actually also seen profound changes politically.
Well, it hasn't seen these changes sufficiently yet, Krishnan. But there's no question that it's like a national PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder. People are still devastated. People mentally are still living on October 7th. And that explains, although it does not justify, but it does explain the denial in which they are living in respect to what's going on in Gaza and what Israel did in Gaza, and the conspicuous and glaring absence of any political, attainable framework for post-war Gaza. I think that, you look at it from a societal point of view, the issue of the hostages united people, but on every single other thing, particularly passing judgment on Prime Minister Netanyahu's responsibility, direct and indirect, in policy making and management or prosecution of the war, close to 70% want him out and see him responsible. But as I said at the outset, that hasn't materialized yet.
Omar Rahman, obviously the changes across the Middle East have been extraordinary and vast. But how do you reflect on what the greater meaning of that is in terms of regional security?
Certainly the geopolitics of the region have shifted dramatically. Everywhere from the devastation in Gaza, which is going to be generational in its implications and the ripple effect of that, I imagine, to Lebanon, to Syria, and the political changes that have happened there, the war between Israel and Iran, the strikes that Israel carried out in the Gulf and Iran carried out in Qatar as well, all have massive implications, especially for the security of the whole region and what we'll see into the future. But just to take the last strike against Qatar, that already has had large implications in terms of the U.S. Security umbrella in the region, the relationship between Qatar and the United States, and we've seen a response from Donald Trump to accentuate or enhance the security arrangement between the United States and Israel. The United States and Qatar, excuse me. And so the implications are very far-reaching, and they go beyond the region itself, obviously, to the whole world. We're seeing this ripple around the world in terms of its effects from the halls of the United Nations to the streets of London and Berlin and Jakarta and everywhere else, and the campuses of New York. This is having an effect, and it's becoming even a litmus test in the politics of those Western states who have continued to support Israel throughout this genocide in the Gaza Strip. And so it's coming home to roost in certain regards in that effect. And I think we're only scratching the surface here in terms of the effects of October 7th.
Yes, of course. Alan Pincus, when you think about that Western support for Israel, it's changed and it's fractured over the last 2 years, and Israel has felt isolated in all sorts of ways, not just from governments, but by people around the world, and the size of all those demonstrations on European and American streets.
Yeah, look, we all look at what's going on in the last 2 years, and we're all sort of amazed, astonished at how is it that within 2 years from world support and sympathy and understanding to the calamity and catastrophe of October 7th, how the world turned against Israel and ostracized it and put it on the brink of being a pariah state. But if you look at it from a broader historical perspective, and historical, I don't mean decades, the world has been telling Israel since 1967 that occupation is untenable, it is unsustainable, and it is morally wrong. The world patiently waited throughout the 70s, the 80s, and into the 90s. Then came the Oslo process, and there was some kind of hope, which was then shattered and undermined by both sides. It doesn't matter who's to blame here. Right? And then the world again, went back into its own problems. And right now, this war, and I think, the lingering, enduring effects of it in terms of Israel's international standing is that it lost the moral high ground that it thought, still many think, I think wrongly, but the moral high ground that Israelis thought they were holding forever, and the support that they received from the world in reinforcing that's gone probably, arguably, forever.
Alan Pinkas, I'm sorry to end it there, but thank you very much indeed. And Omar Rahman, thank you very much indeed. I hope we can come back and continue the conversation.